So for a lot of people, increasing gas supplies are the worst thing ever that can be produced. But what I learned recently from a professor that in Africa, more people are killed by toxic of CO2 and so on by burning in their kitchens at home.
Yeah.
Not talking about cutting the last trees in Africa. And if they would be provided with gas, the ecological impact would be huge.
Welcome to PEP, the Protect Europe podcast, where we interview founders and investors building the technology that protects Europe's values, way of life, and infrastructure. Carsten, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You've been recommended by a number of friends, so it's great to meet in person. So tell me a little bit about Europipe and what do you guys do?
Thanks a lot for having me here today, Colin. Yeah, actually, Europipe is a German company based in the Ruhr region in the industrial heart of Germany, being a daughter company from Dillinger and Salzgitter, two German steel groups. And actually, we are producing pipe. So we are producing steel pipes welded, and these pipes serve as the basis for big gas pipelines, for hydrogen pipelines, and in the future for CO2 pipelines. So we are more or less a sub-supplier of the energy ecosystem, and we have been a long track record. We did supply lines like the famous Nord Stream, which is a political sensitive issue, but the pipes have been of excellent quality. So we have been supplying pipes all over the world, especially for big pipelines onshore as well as offshore.
Oh, fantastic. That's a great summary. And I love the Nord Stream one. So we should definitely pick that up just briefly. And again, I think most people don't appreciate how dependent we are on the energy infrastructure, right? You know, we all know it when it's gone. But obviously, I don't think we appreciate it while it's there because it just becomes part of our natural everyday lives.
Yeah, but
so,
again, let me put it like that, Colin. In Germany, we started appreciating it after the attack of the Russians, when we carefully did follow, let's say, the filling stand of the storage capacities of natural gas in Germany every day when it was monitored. And so everybody was aware if there is an incident in the supply chain of energy, this has tremendous impacts.
Okay, so hold on, unpack that one for me. So basically Russia attacks and then effectively Joe Public starts following this or the industry starts following this. Who gets super excited about
Everybody got excited because as an individual, you wanted to have a safe and warm house during the winter. So it was really the case. And then when the war did start and the supplies of natural gas were coming down, is there enough gas in Germany? And for sure, as an industry, you have been very much impacted. Some, let's say, furnaces in place or whatever. You were wondering a lot, are there possibilities to shift to electrical solutions? But again, as a lot of the heating is done in the houses in Germany, a lot of people were really concerned, and at least everybody had the effects in his pocket as the prices did rise sharply. So really the supplies and an working infrastructure is of a tremendous importance, not only in Europe, all over the world.
Absolutely. Okay, so that was kind of very closely monitored after the attack. Where's the position on gas energy in Germany today? Are we still? Is this kind of like we've forgotten COVID? Like, you know, it was, you know, we all got very used to it, became the new normal. Then we all got very used to it not being around. Are we in that sort of situation, or are we still very much on a high watch level threshold?
We have been coming back a little bit to a high watch threshold there. Let's say. To take this picture, COVID is still there, as the Russian gas is not there anymore. And I think the public is not following so closely what is happening with the big contracts on LNG imports coming from America and so on. But the total energy flows in Europe have been shifted more from a east-west direction to a north-south or even west-east direction. So we are following currently the discussions on the US, on Qatar, which have been announcing maybe to limit the LNG exports because of some regulations in Europe. So I think most of the people at the end of the day are not really aware of the big energy game that is especially related to geostrategical thinkings and thoughts behind. So, yeah, still today it's an issue. We are still suffering of high prices. So this is a burden for the industry. This is a burden for normal people. But for the time being, in these days, it's not on the top agenda in Germany anymore for Mr. Average and Mrs. Average.
Okay, and just how has it affected you as a business? So at the moment you're providing this piping. Have you seen a massive, okay, we used to go east-west and now we basically have to go north-south and we just don't have the infrastructure. You can't spin these things up in seconds. How has that then impacted on you?
Yeah, so in Europe, the impact on the pipelines have been limited because most of the LNG, as I said, is shipped. So it's coming in by ship. You don't have more vessels, or you have more vessels, but not more pipelines being built. There might be effects in the midterm future. There are big projects in Africa bringing up natural gas through a giant pipeline going from Nigeria over Morocco to Europe. There are projects in the Mediterranean to, let's say, exploit other resources. But I think it made a push beside the ecological issues to all the discussions we had 2 or 3 years ago on ramping up the hydrogen network. So this had really a huge impact. But for sure, these days, all the discussions on hydrogens and renewables have been calming down quite considerably because as well for hydrogen as for CCS or the two transport, we have the chicken and egg problem. Today in Europe, nobody really knows yet where the hydrogen is coming from. And if you don't know from where the hydrogen is coming from, you don't need necessarily onshore pipelines to distribute the hydrogen.
Yes. Okay, get it.
So, but yeah, this was another push. I think the politics in Russia, Ukraine, and then the interruption of the supplies did give another push to all the reflections ongoing for alternative, let's say, alternative media like H2. But all over Europe, what we just said before, the discussions have risen a lot. And I was referring to this chicken and egg problem because the renewables are not available to the same extent that they are needed. The costs for it are really very high. And so a lot of projects now are being a little bit delayed.
Okay. And does that, and again, let's make sure we stay within your field of operations. Does that leave Europe in basically a very difficult place, right? Where effectively, the Russia situation continues. We may or may not be able to bridge the gap with the liquid natural gas. We don't know whether hydrogen's coming or will not. Certain countries are going ahead with nuclear programs. Certain countries are not. And politicians, it's very difficult for them to make those long-term infrastructure bets because of the short-term nature of politics, etc., etc. European Union is one thing, Germany's another. Does that just leave us in a kind of gap, right, waiting for something to happen? Or is there something else under the surface that you're seeing from kind of your perspective?
No, I think you summed it up perfectly.
Oh dear.
And we are all, let's say, in favor of reducing CO2 emissions and having a positive contribution to the climate. But at the end of the day, I think it's not only the case in Germany. A lot of people are afraid today that we are heading in the right direction. But if afterwards energy is getting so costly in Europe compared to other parts of the world, you don't have any industry left. And so you don't need the hydrogen and you don't have the people who are there to inject the CO2 for CO2 lines. And so this is for me really something like a perfect knot and really very difficult to dissolve, having this for sure obligation on the one hand side to decarbonize, yes, but on the other hand side, having an industry staying competitive. And in my opinion, what, let's say, is one of the challenges, I think, in Germany and elsewhere, that we are so categoric. If you look back, having the discussions in Germany, hydrogen could only be green. If you go for another hydrogen, a blue one, no, this was a thing completely coming out of hell. But I think all technology changes do not happen from today to tomorrow by changing the world by 180 degrees. So you need intermediate steps. And if you really want to jump directly 8 meters, you will never ever go for it. And there is now a new realism, but I would say if we had this higher realistic approach 2-3 years ago, we would have been much further already today.
Okay, no, very, very interesting. Look, again, I want to go back to your business in a second, but I do think it was very interesting for me. I was just looking at the graphs coming out of China over the last few days, which are showing that effectively they've not just reduced their carbon emissions, but effectively probably actually peaked in 2024 and actually have come down in 2025 and are on a quite steep trajectory curve downwards while still ramping up energy per capita. And obviously, I think, that's all well known. It's massive deployment of solar has been the big thing. Plus, obviously, ramping up nuclear. There's still a bunch of coal in the mix. But actually, what's been impressive in China is the fact that they are probably peaked their emissions last year.
Exactly.
And obviously, they've got, outside the China and the US, they're the big two in terms of carbon emissions. So I think that is itself very interesting. No real comment on the regime, just more a focus the fact that, hey, they put their numbers into reverse. Now, let's go back to Europipe per se. So then give me some numbers around the business. And not necessarily how many meters of pipe, because it's going to just be a very, very big number. But what are your kind of internal metrics that you look at in terms of managing the health of your business and your kind of market share and your positioning?
Yeah. For us, it's all about, we are heavy industry, output, and productivity. So Europipe is the biggest pipe mill for LSAW, so longitudinal and welded pipes in the Western Hemisphere. And we have a capacity that's, depending on the sizes we are producing, going up to 800,000 tons per year. So being translated into kilometers, we could produce, if we are running full steam, 2-shift system, 2,000 kilometers of pipe every year. So this is a huge advantage. You have a high productivity, but on the other hand side, for sure, you have to feed these kind of monsters. And as we are related to the steel industry, our metrics are always tons.
Okay.
Having said that, our mother companies are plate producers, they are very much interested that we are getting loaded. So we are, let's say, part of their downstream strategy, to put it like that. So we are a big customer for Salzgitter and for Dillinger. So the metrics for us, which are getting more important for sure, and relating a little bit to ecological issues too, are the CO2 emissions. We always have to bear in mind, first point, this is only interesting to European customers today. Customers in the US or elsewhere, they really don't care about what is the carbon footprint of our pipes. And secondly, if you have a look into the chain, the scope 3, that means the plate are accounting for 97% of the CO2 footprint. So even if we have ambitious goals to reduce the footprint of Europipe itself, which is fair enough by multiple, let's say, action, the biggest part of the footprint is coming out of the pre-material, the plates.
Yeah.
And there, if we step back the value chain, both mother companies have really important programs to decarbonize, so which in the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years, they have major transformation programs costing a hell of money. But at the end of the day, and this is not, let's say, nasty, what is the difference afterwards? Hopefully the quality of the steel is the same. I appreciate very much the positive impact for the ecosystem, but who is willing at the end of the day to pay 100, 150 euros extra for it? So somebody has to pay the bill. And this will be a very interesting, let's say, challenge in the next couple of years. Will there be a willingness, support, let's say, from the states to favor the steel that is ecologically produced? And we have this CBAM system being in place, or now starting by next year in Europe. But let's say a lot of discussions are going on CO2 pricing. And if there are some major changes, it will be really difficult to maintain the calculations having done in the beginning. So this will be one of the major tasks for us. And talking about these kind of CBAM, let's say, protection. For us, if we have European steel that will be more costly produced compared to other one to dirty steel, and we are competing on the global markets, it will be very tough to compete with higher costs for the pre-material.
Yeah, and look, I think that's a really interesting statement. And I spent a bit of time in the steel industry here in the Nordics, and again, it was really interesting to see who was moving from kind of to electric arc production, etc. And sometimes it was fine because that site had kind of reached the end of its natural life, and they'd extended it a few times, and then they were moving into other positions, not just around the electric arc, but also where they got the energy from. Now, obviously, this was North Finland, Sweden. Majority of the energy was kind of green in terms of its nuclear or its hydro type base. So that was also particularly interesting. And I think, again, it's the question of the regulation that we bring to ourselves, and then the question around how do we position that on a global market so that we stay competitive and we continue to develop this capability to produce these things here in Europe. Because I think one of the challenges, and we talk steel, but I met an aluminium smelting company the other day, and they were explaining to me how few aluminium smelting companies manufacturing capability we still have in Europe. And it wasn't fingers of one hand. It was like 3 fingers of one hand. It was pretty small. And again, there's that question of, well, it's fine. Outsource that to China. Great. But you're still on the same planet, right? You haven't put it to planet China, which has a different set of CO2 emissions. You've put it to,
this is one point, that we are still one global planet, first point. And second point is a lot of people, let's say, or the only positive effect of this war in the Ukraine is that we have been alerted again on supply chains.
Yes.
Because it's fair enough to say we are in a global competition, so leave the steel industry away, buy all the steel from elsewhere. But it's not because I'm a steel guy, but I think even in 20 years, steel will play an important role as a base material for a lot of different application. And if afterwards you are really depending for all your infrastructure to build only on non-European imports, this is extremely critical. Not now talking about defense, which is a really small niche, but all the other stuff. Yeah. And let's say this is really dangerous in my opinion. And maybe the steel industry has already been shrinking a lot in Europe, but I personally can't see Europe without any steel industry. And very often, making a short step aside, people are not always trying to look behind the figures. So for a lot of people, increasing gas supplies are the worst thing ever that can be produced. But what I learned recently from a professor, that in Africa, more people are killed by toxic of CO2 and so on by burning in their kitchens at home. Yep. Not talking about cutting the last trees in Africa. And if they would be provided with gas, the ecological impact would be huge. So this is always what I just said before in Germany with the discussion. No, we need green hydrogen. No, blue hydrogen. We can't at all. It's not good. We have to do this directly. But how can we connect African ladies wanting to cook something to a hydrogen network or something else? It's completely illusory. And this is what I miss in our discussions sometimes, a certain really looking behind the scenes and having a pragmatism, because for sure it would be desirable that everybody is living 100% CO2 neutral. But if I can't achieve this goal directly, I have to think about intermediate steps to decrease at least the soonest possible the impact.
No, look, you would get on extremely well with my very good friend Shimon, who basically we have this topic quite regularly around. No source of energy is bad, right? And again, it's a question of, sometimes horses for courses. So, actually you can save deaths by doing this. You can increase productivity by doing this. And at some stage, you should also do that. Now, one quick question for you. And you mentioned the whole steel has this 20-year kind of, not 20-year, for the next 20 years, steel, etc. And it just reminds me that I spent a bit of time with a founder recently looking at graphene. Now, again, this was taking me through the story of graphene as a smart material. And I hadn't realized that graphene had been created in 2004, which was sadly a while ago. And it hadn't reached its potential, mainly because we'd stuck to this pure, it's difficult to unlock its potential, even though it's huge. And what they were doing as a company, which I thought was very interesting, is mixing graphene with other materials to make the other materials better. So kind of like, don't wait for the superhero with all the powers who's going to show up very irregularly and it's very difficult to get on the phone. Basically take a little bit of that superpower, drop it into a material that we know how to produce at massive scale, and just make that at least X better rather than wait for the purist. And that sounded very much like your approach there in terms of a kind of a pragmatic, what can we produce at scale? So where are you on the kind of smart materials or the development of these kind of hybrid material space? Does that play a part in your business?
Not so much. Actually, we are focused on steel. Total production technology is set up to produce pipes made out of steel. Let's say the standard grades themselves, they have not been changing for the last couple of years so far. But for sure, we have high requirements now coming out of the new media, because this is a big discussion what we have. If we are talking for sure about CCS, you have to put CO2 through a pipeline, and CO2, you might know it, acts completely different if it's in a gasified or in a solid phase. If it's in a solid phase and you have the smallest defect in the pipeline, this creates a real burst. So there are a lot of, let's say, research going on, how the material has to be specified in detail to have a really safe pipeline. Because nobody wants to have a CO2 pipeline running through the rural region, having a leak, and maybe nobody, in 100,000 people.
Not a good idea.
Not a good idea. And in the dense phases, it's more efficient, it's more economic to get it transported. So there's a lot of research on these kind of security aspects. And for sure that we have to guarantee that the pipes are carrying at a certain pressure. The H2, there had been a lot of research being done. So the modifications for the H2 transport have been of minor importance, but there's really a lot of research on CO2 transport, how the steel has to be specified, what are all the different issues, how do you have to balance the mechanical values and all this kind of stuff.
Super interesting. So let's go to that. You kind of foreshadowed a little bit of the Nord Stream stuff. And actually, I've kind of not kept up with the story, other than clearly something happened. What happened at Nord Stream, if we know? And then what measures do you, if you can, protect this infrastructure layer? What can you do?
I'm for sure not in the game, so I only know what the media are reporting. And these days, a guy from Italy was sent over to German justice who is suspected to have been part of the attacks. So at the end of the day, we had an explosion of a part of the pipeline. So it was interrupted. We all remember the big, let's say, bubbles coming out.
Yeah.
Which was at the end of the day the gas. And frankly speaking, in my opinion, if somebody really plans an attack on such a pipeline, it's impossible to avoid it. For sure, there are several measures, even military, let's say in the Baltic, so they are much more aware today. But we all might remember all these stories that a Chinese ship was around and a data cable was damaged by coincidence.
Yeah.
I think that all this is part of hybrid wars.
Yeah, definitely. It's the same. Yeah, hybrid attacks, hybrid
attacks. So what you generally do, if you have pipelines offshore, these are not only the bare steel pipes, you coat them with concrete. So this is, let's say, to bring them down so that they are not swimming up. But on the other hand side, it's a certain protection against mechanical damages like anchors and so on. But once again, if you send the Navy SEALs to whatever pipeline in the world, they should be able to get it, make a small explosion.
Hollywood would tell you that they get through and they make a big bang.
It's not against the US. It might be whoever, the mafia, whoever wants to make money. If they are specialists, they can do it. And what we heard, it was a small sailing boat bringing these people to the pipeline. So it was not a team of 200 people. There have been 10 people maybe getting it.
Okay, so then attacks are extremely difficult because effectively I turn up in a field somewhere and basically miles from here. But then outside the attacks, how do you then do you probably don't, but how is the pipes and infrastructure monitored? How do we actually keep an eye? Is it just pressure changes? Is it IoT? Is it a bunch of drones flying over these things? How does that bit work?
Normally today, for the onshore pipelines, for the grids, we have huge monitoring centers where they are permanently monitoring the pressure. What you just said, is there something of an issue? And that's essentially the same for the offshore pipeline. So if there's an incident, you directly get noticed by a change of the pressure.
Okay. And then I'm just quite curious. Then how do you then, and our team, you fix this thing, etc., etc. There is the question there around how much capability or resilience can you actually put into a system, right? Is it a question of fixing something on the go, or is it a question of actually, no, there is not much slack. All these pipes are allocated to other customers for other projects. Repair is only what we can do. New piping takes a lot longer. In terms of, I don't know the lead times in the system.
You're talking about the lead time of us, for example, of Europipe?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would say this is an advantage, having two mother companies out of the steel industry. So a very long period, all these projects are prepared. You have projects that are running for 5 years, not having financing, design and modifications and so on. So you have really long time before. Then you are fixing the design. There are tendering processes going sometimes for several years. But when we have come to the conclusion, get a contract and everything is clear, we can usually start with the pipe production, if we have some capacity left, 6 weeks after, which is extremely quickly. Because the mills are in Germany. One mill is located 1 kilometer away from us. The other one is 300 kilometers, 400 kilometers away in the Saar region. So direct rail connection, this is quickly. And there again, the big production capacities help. Currently, there's something running in Europe where people need pipe by end of March, which is extremely short. So we started quoting this week, and we are rather confident, if this is really the time schedule that has to be respected, that we would go for the job, because nobody else has this big capacity to ramp it up as quickly. But normally on the big pipelines, to come back to your point, there are not major issues. And really, we never ever get a quality claim after 4, 5, 6 years that says, oh God, you have a problem with your pipes, it's leaking. The pipes that we are producing, and others too, are among the best controlled goods in the world. We have X-ray, ultrasonic. If you come to us and see the production process and the number of steps in the production process where the steel is really transformed, it's much, much less compared to all inspection checks, security, and so on.
Okay,
because you won't imagine, coming back to the famous Nord Stream, there would have been a problem with a pipe and it would have been interrupted and no gas flowing. This could kill any company because the cost would be so huge.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's super interesting. And just to help me out in terms of, obviously, I love the vertically integrated 1 kilometer down the road. Therefore, that gives you the capability to act on those sort of contracts. That's fantastic. Who are the other big pipe producers in this space globally? Obviously, very much aware of yourself in Europe. Who are your then kind of natural competitors? Is it banned by geography or is it something else?
There have been a lot of changes. So we have one very important European competitor. It's a Greek company. This is really a very, very successful company too. On the global level, we have Indian competitors very much. We have one competitor in Brazil, and then local competitors in the US and elsewhere. The Chinese are not yet so much active all over the world, but in South America, in Africa, they are bumping really in, and they are playing the card of partial project finance and then delivering afterward the infrastructure too. So this is a very successful, let's say, leverage for them, which we saw in investing in harbor infrastructure throughout the world and so on. And what
Very much so.
So it's a little bit the same issue. And what we saw the last couple of years, for sure, the Middle East is a very important market in terms of gas pipelines, oil pipelines, and so on. But they set up an important, let's say, local production capacity. So this is a part of the world we are not heading for anymore, as you have really local producers. So there have been shifts. And let's say, interesting enough, everybody heard about the big tariffs in the US of 50%, especially on the steel products. We are following the US very closely because currently it's a booming market. There are huge projects because of their strategy to export LNG, and the LNG or the natural gas has to come to the harbors to be liquefied. Yep. So you need pipelines. And the second point is that the increase in the setup of the AI data centers requires a lot of energy. For the very big data centers, they set up a data center, they send a power central just nearby, and to feed the power central, they are setting up a pipeline. And
there's no question about it. You know, if you look at and I used to live in Texas. I used to live in the Woodlands, which is just north of Houston.
I've been there 4 weeks ago in the Woodlands.
There you go. So lovely spot. But you can't not understand that effectively the US economy now is pretty much flat without this data center build out. And those data centers, because of the permitting issues and the difficulty of scaling up American electricity supply, it's very gas powered, right? It's like, look at what Musk has done in Memphis, what Zuckerberg is doing elsewhere, et cetera, et cetera. Massive amounts of energy as quickly as possible. There's a couple of interesting companies coming into this space. I think one of them's called Crusoe. I think it is. I don't know if you've heard of that. I think what they've done. Crusoe, like with an E. And what they're doing is, which I think is an interesting play, is that they've basically set up their data center capacity near waste energy or production in the Texas oil field. So the stuff that would just burn off, they're capturing that and then sticking the data center. And obviously, everyone will tell you data center latency is really important. You want as close to the consumer as possible. But you also want this thing to be running on good energy supply, ideally as use waste energy and turn it into real energy. And the costs of building in West Texas are not the cost of building in Southern California. So, you might suffer a little bit of latency loss initially, but actually you get it built within the next 12 months rather than in the next 5 years. I think that's a company that I've been keeping an eye on because I think they're doing something quite interesting in this space, which is obviously they are doing the piping, but they are doing it basically on the oil fields.
Okay. Normally the oil fields, these are too small diameters for us as we are really in big pipes. Yeah, but these are the reasons why we are eyeing so much on the US currently. And local mills are extremely well loaded. So to realize all the ambitious plans for LNG exports and so on, there will be considerable demand of pipes that have to be imported in the US. So let's see. So this is for us really now a target market for the next 1 to 2 years.
Absolutely. No, look, fascinating, and I'm glad that you had spent some time in the Woodlands. It's a great place.
Only one afternoon, not so much time. The rest was in Houston.
So that was quite interesting. But look, Carsten, you've been fantastic. This has been such an interesting conversation for me in terms of understanding, again, some of the, I'm going to put it politely, the conflicts in the system, right? Yeah. And, how you're trying to do this thing, but be globally competitive. You're trying to ensure effectively reducing overall carbon emissions, but actually it's in the pre-material stage. You've got a bit of a game of 3D chess or D chess.
That's it. I like
you
this.
Actually have to
I like this.
I can see how you're having to do this. So this was really, really, really fascinating.
No,
and
thank you very much for the interesting exchange, Colin.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. To make sure you catch us again, please follow us on your favorite podcasting platform.